What took down one of the most powerful empires in history, Rome, at its peak in 117 CE, ruled over 70 million people and stretched across 5 million square kilometers. Yet, political corruption, economic chaos, and the constant threat of invasion chipped away at its core. Picture this: what if a single reform in 212 AD had stopped a 50-year collapse before it started? What if Rome had patched those cracks and never fell, staying strong all the way to 2025? Imagine a world where aqueducts still flow, legions use drones, and Latin pops up on your smartphone. Which imperial reform do you think would matter most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. But before we see how Rome could have changed everything, let's look at the flaws that nearly doomed it, and how fixing them might have rewritten history. Rome's biggest problems weren't just outside its borders, they were baked into its core systems. Economic instability, corrupt leadership, and a political structure that couldn't keep up with the demands of a sprawling empire set the stage for disaster. The crisis of the 3rd century showed how quickly things could unravel. In just 50 years, Rome cycled through more than 24 emperors, most of them rising and falling through civil war or assassination. There was no reliable way to transfer power, so every transition became a gamble. If Rome had adopted a system of merit-based succession, like the one Marcus Aurelius tried to model by sharing power with trusted co-rulers and choosing capable heirs, it could have broken this cycle. Instead of the Praetorian Guard deciding who wore the purple, leadership would have passed to those with proven ability, not just political connections or brute force. On the economic front, the empire kept shooting itself in the foot. Nero's reign is a classic example. His spending on massive building projects drained the treasury, but the real damage came from his decision to devalue the currency. He reduced the silver content in Roman coins, triggering decades of inflation, a pattern later emperors followed. As coins lost value, prices soared, and public trust in the economy evaporated. If Rome had enforced strict fiscal reforms early on, keeping the currency stable and prioritizing sustainable spending, it could have shielded itself from the runaway inflation that made life harder for citizens and soldiers alike. Military policy was another blind spot. In 212 AD, Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to all free men in the empire. Research shows this move, meant to expand the tax base, actually stripped the army of its unique incentive: military service as the sole path to citizenship. With that motivation gone, enlistment dropped, and the military struggled to fill its ranks. A better approach would have been to keep citizenship as a reward for service, or to offer land and other benefits to loyal soldiers. This would have kept the legions strong and loyal, giving Rome a reliable force to defend its borders and support its government. Augustus set up an efficient bureaucracy and introduced social programs that kept the empire stable for a time. But his system depended on having a strong leader at the top. When weaker emperors took over, that structure crumbled. If Rome had built on the idea of joint rule, where power was shared between capable leaders, each keeping the other in check, it could have avoided collapses every time the top job changed hands. This approach, rooted in actual Roman practice, would have limited the chaos that came with succession. The Senate, once the backbone of Roman politics, faded into irrelevance as it became dominated by the elite. Reforming the Senate, opening it up to new blood, redistributing wealth, and giving it real power, could have made it a force for stability. A revitalized Senate, working alongside a merit-based leadership, could have acted as a check on the Praetorian Guard and helped prevent the political murders that plagued later emperors. Imagine a Senate that tackled real problems, like food shortages or infrastructure failures, rather than just serving as a rubber stamp. With these changes, merit-based succession, stable finances, a motivated military, and a Senate that actually mattered, Rome could have avoided the worst crises in its history. Civil wars would be rare, armies would be loyal and well-paid, and the government would be run by people who knew what they were doing. The empire's foundation would be solid, ready to face whatever came next. With its house finally in order, imagine how Rome could have reshaped the modern world. Picture a city where every street sign is in Latin, and your smartphone pings with messages in the language of emperors. That's not just a gimmick, it's the logical outcome of Rome's policy of linguistic assimilation, which research shows was applied to every province. Over centuries, Latin would have evolved and spread, becoming the world's default language for government, business, science, and even pop culture. Instead of English, you'd order your coffee at Coffea Statio Romana and scan news headlines written in a modernized Latin. Billions across continents would share a common tongue, creating a cultural glue strong enough to hold together an empire that stretches from the Atlantic to the Middle East. But language is just the entry point. Rome's real power always came from its infrastructure. By 117 CE, its road network spanned over 250,000 miles, connecting cities and armies across 3 continents. In a world where Rome never fell, those roads wouldn't just be ancient stones buried under dirt. They'd form the backbone for modern highways, high-speed rail, and fiber-optic cables. Aqueducts that once fed cities of hundreds of thousands would run parallel to solar grids and water recycling plants. Roman concrete, famous for its durability, no one matched it for 1,000 years, would be the base for skyscrapers and bridges built to withstand centuries. Cities would blend ancient arches and forums with glass towers and digital billboards, all resting on the bones of Roman engineering. The empire's obsession with connectivity would only grow. Its central planners would see the value in linking every corner of the map, by road, rail, and digital network. Imagine a world where you can travel from Londinium to Alexandria by bullet train, or send a package from Hispania to Syria in a day. Rome's centralized administration would keep trade, information, and people moving at a pace rivaling or outpacing modern global powers. The empire could control supply chains, monitor borders, and coordinate responses to crises with a speed and efficiency that would shape the daily lives of billions. Military power would look very different, too. By 2025, Rome could field a 1 million-strong army, disciplined and tech-savvy. The legions would still march, but now they'd use drones, night vision gear, and digital mapping. Ancient formations would merge with modern tactics, making Rome a military superpower on par with the United States or China. The empire's reach would be global, its presence felt in every major region, and its discipline would set the standard for armed forces everywhere. But no empire rides an endless wave. Rome's centralized control would help it adapt to globalization, but it would also face new strains. The Industrial Revolution would test the old order. Rome's economy was built on agriculture, and for centuries on enslaved labor. Mechanization would threaten millions of jobs, and a heavy reliance on slavery would spark unrest as machines replaced manual work. Social divisions would deepen, and rebellions could erupt earlier and more violently than in our timeline. The empire would have to choose: abolish slavery and modernize, or risk collapse from within. Political reform would be just as contentious. Rome's core was always autocratic. Even as the empire expanded, the Senate became a tool for the elite, not a voice for the people. Would Rome have survived the 1848 revolutions without cracking open its autocratic core? The pressure for democracy and human rights would build, especially as the empire absorbed new cultures and ideas. Centralized power brings stability, but it also makes dissent dangerous. Managing billions of citizens across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East would force Rome to confront questions of citizenship, rights, and identity on an unprecedented scale. Rival powers wouldn't disappear either. Research points to a potential Sino-Roman standoff if the Han dynasty survived. The world could see a Cold War-style race between 2 ancient superpowers, each pushing for dominance in technology, space, and global influence. The competition would drive innovation, but also create constant tension, forcing Rome to adapt or risk being outpaced. And then there's the environment. Rome's economy depended on steady harvests, but climate change would threaten food supplies and stability. The empire's ancient skills in hydraulic engineering could pivot to building seawalls, massive irrigation projects, and new farming techniques. But tradition can slow change. The question would be whether Rome's leadership could innovate fast enough to meet the challenge, or if its old ways would hold it back. Rome's strengths, unity, infrastructure, centralized power, would give it a unique edge. But those same traits could make it dangerously fragile, vulnerable to shocks from within and without. As we look at this alternate world, the real question isn't just how long Rome could last, but what it would take for any empire to survive the pressures of modernity. If Rome had never fallen, we'd see a world unified by its discipline and infrastructure, but maybe always dangling on the brink of a revolt sparked by slavery-era legacies or a climate-fueled famine. Its legions would march with drones, and its forums would run global trade. But the same centralized power that made it strong could be its undoing when faced with new threats. So which modern challenge would finally break the empire? A climate crisis, an AI uprising, or a global revolt? Let me know in the comments. In a world where nothing changed for 2,000 years, maybe the only constant is change itself. What epic what-if world would you explore next? Share your ideas below. If you loved this video, smash that like button, subscribe for more mind-blowing alternate histories, and hit the bell. Our next adventure drops soon with another game-changing twist. Catch you in another world of the wildest what-ifs.